Most people have heard of him in relation to the Swedish trumped up rape allegations. And it's really important to debunk them, to explain the role of the media in mischaracterizing the case and creating a smear campaign.
The Swedish case is one of the most anomalous crime investigation I have ever seen as a journalist. Two women went to the police for having Julian Assange testing for sexually transmitted illness.
The evidence was really manufactured, and it turned out to be complete distortion of the actual situation, where two women wanted him to get an HIV test, not to have him prosecuted in any way, and they were distraught that he was being persecuted.
The public understanding of this case was terrible. The people couldn't understand what was really going on. The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, he reads and speaks Swedish, so he was able to read the preliminary investigation documentation and to expose at least 40 perceived violations of due process, including active manipulation of evidence. The case was opened in 2010, closed in 2010 after 5 days, reopened in 2010, kept artificially open for 6 years when it was finally questioned in November 2016. And in May 2017, the prosecutor Mariani closed the investigation and dismissed the case. And then, when Julian was arrested in April 2019, a new Swedish prosecutor reopened the case, but of course there was no case at all. So she closed the investigation once and for all in November 2019, and there were never charges. You know, this case was just a preliminary investigation. Julian was never ever charged for rape. And I can assure you that if they had any evidence, they could have immediately charged him and immediately put him on trial, and they didn't. This case has been used to destroy his reputation, his credibility, and to focus the public opinion attention on a rape case that never was.
It was just part of this manipulated firestorm that was created in an effort to bring Assange down.
Since 2015, I have been engaging in a real trench warfare to access the full documentation, because this allowed to answer to that crucial question, why Julian was inside the embassy with no end in sight. And the reason was that it was the UK authorities who had told to the Swedish prosecutors not to go to London to question him. And by doing this, they had created this legal paralysis.
Once WikiLeaks published Vault 7, it was, of course, targeted by the CIA and the intelligence community. And part of that smear campaign was to paint WikiLeaks as a surrogate or a front for a hostile power, i.e. Russia. The Mueller report, which investigated the Trump-Russia saga and found no collaboration between the Trump campaign and Russia, exonerated WikiLeaks. So there's zero evidence that Russia provided any leaks or information to WikiLeaks. We should also be clear that WikiLeaks published over 700,000 files on Russia itself, which wouldn't endear WikiLeaks or Julian to the Kremlin.
One of the arguments we hear about why Julian Assange should be targeted from those who believe he should is that he somehow put people at risk. But what we've seen in more than 10 years now is a complete failure by the US government to present any evidence of any concrete harm caused to anybody.
at Chelsea Manning's trial at Fort Meade, which I attended, the charge was made that lives were put at risk through the disclosure of information provided by WikiLeaks. But even in that trial, the prosecution had to admit that that was not true.
Apart from the CIA, even journalistic enemies needed to cut him out from the protections that would surround a journalist. They needed something to distinguish it, and they couldn't really get one except this one. They fell upon this one. He didn't redact. It couldn't have been a more contrary position put. In the final weeks, he had this material in his possession. In the final weeks, The Guardian, the New York Times, and Der Spiegel became involved in processing and sifting through this material and had agreed on a joint launch. The guy that redacted it, that tried to put a halt to it, was not any one of them. The only one that said delay was Julian Assange. And I was with him, absolutely with him, and I'll say this in any court, certainly in an American court. He was the one that firstly tried to call a halt to it, but it was Julian who tried to stop the release until that full redaction had been done. From Thursday to the early hours of Monday morning to redact, and I was with him, we were sharing an apartment. He redacted 10,000 names by himself, quite literally. Stayed up, all night. On the main night that he sort of cracked it, I left him. Last saw him at 2 a.m. He was at it, and I next saw him at 9 a.m. He was still at it. That was the fundamental work that made that tranche of documents safe.
There was 96 media partners carefully redacting the cables until David Lee and Luke Harding published the password in their book.
He had a great sense of responsibility for the material, for the source who provided the material, and for the material itself. He went to great pains. He contacted Hillary Clinton to ask for help in redacting names. He offered that to the US government and they declined.
The US military accounts of local informers that they have, they're given in some detail.
Yeah, well, we've withheld all those.
But do you lie awake at night wondering whether you have found all of those, whether
Well, they have a particular
code.
A particular code
within the reports. So you excise those as best you can.
It wasn't too hard. Okay. Now that said, it is possible. I mean, there may be a stray report here or a stray report there. The choice, in the end, we are forced to make hard choices, and those hard choices are: do we do best effort to minimise harm, which we have done, with the understanding that this is an extraordinary body of material capable of producing extraordinary reforms.
So what I want to say to people looking at this out here, if you think Assange is a traitor, he's a rapist, he's a narcissist, he's a hacker, I don't blame you, because you have been deceived. And if you think you've not been deceived, that's normal, because otherwise it wouldn't be deception.